I'll be as quick as I can. Now, both THEA and IUA submission references the National Training Fund, and this, I feel, is a very important issue. The programme for government is committed to utilising the NTF surplus, and the suspension of EU fiscal rules due to COVID also provided a window of opportunity to do that. This has not happened so far. The reserve was as high as 817 million a year ago and was projected to increase. This money was supposed to be invested in training and education, and my question around that is, do you believe that the National Training Fund should be used to provide core funding rather than the current situation of allocating to higher education through mechanisms such as the Human Capital Initiative? If you don't mind, I'll ask two other questions as well with this, and you can address them all together. And one is around the stark inequalities that have been exposed again in the CSO figures last week, and the gap between the northern and western region and the national average in 2020 is now estimated to be 3 times higher than it was a decade ago. 3 times higher. And I think that is disgraceful. And underinvestment in key infrastructure assets is likely to have contributed to the rising disparities. And when we look at further education, and John Daly, the economist, has done that, and he says the higher education institutes based in the northern and western region on average receive capital funding of 316 per undergraduate enrolled between 2010 and 2020, which was below the corresponding national figure, which was 375. While such capital investment was below the state average in 8 out of 10 of the last 11 inclusive years. And my question on that, I suppose, is what needs to be done in the northern and western regions to address that disparity? I very much welcome the Atlantic Technological University. I think but how much funding will have to be weighted? Because I do believe we need positive discrimination there to address that imbalance there. I have another question, but maybe those two first. Is there?
If I take maybe the National Training Fund one, your first question. I think your question is, should it be used for core funding? I mean, we talk to IBEC, the employers, whose members contribute the levies to the National Training Fund. As I say, there's an extra 191 million per year going in there since 2017. We understand that the surplus is now approaching €1 billion. Yeah. And frankly, Deputy, I think it's bizarre that we're here talking about a scarcity of funds in the sector and €1 billion sitting in a bank account somewhere in this state. That issue has to be fixed, and I think employers who contribute the money are equally adamant that it needs to be fixed. Its current framing within a very rigid, narrow skills framework is too narrow, and I think if you look at IBEC's own submissions around this, they've made the case that needs to be broadened. All of our institutions are involved in producing graduates and in doing research to provide skills, or to provide the base for skills in the economy. So I think we need a broader interpretation of a mechanism for how that, and that can't be beyond the ingenuity of the system to come up with that, because I think it's obscene that money remains unspent while there is a glaring need from students and the institutions who house those students for funding.
Yeah, because obviously it's losing value all the time, whereas if it was invested, it would be multiplying. It just doesn't make economic sense at all why it isn't being done. Sorry, Professor Ryan.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And again, to agree with Jim, it is, our understanding is it's up at $1 billion, which is what I said in my statement. The question for core or for how it's used, it should absolutely be used. And one of the questions we've asked continuously is around the governance of this. And I don't mean that in a bad sense, but obviously if the employers are seeing this as a tax, they want to see a return in terms of skills. So how do they feed into what the skills priorities? And that goes to your question, even if you look at the Northwest might be somewhat different, let's say in the East Coast, etc. On the second question, on the positive discrimination, couldn't agree with you more. Have to acknowledge the work that was done around the Turn report. which invested money to try and get these, nascent technological universities up and running. That's been very helpful. We've been talking about continuing that through. That's where, for instance, with the work that I mentioned earlier on the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which will be focused, etc. But there's a couple of things, and you'll be well aware of it, Deputy, yourself. The work that was done through the Royal Irish Academy on the Higher Education Futures, which had a particular focus on the Northwest and on cross-border. And I mention that because I think there's probably a question, how do we inform public policy around detailed questions like this? And I think there is very good work being done there. And you've done your own work on this, as we well know. But I think that sort of work is really going to be critical to this. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to answer your point about how can that money be applied, and you really need to put this question, I think, to IBEC, but I imagine the employers are taking the line that they don't want the money going into a black hole. They actually want this money to be used to enhance skills. And Senator Riley talked earlier about this huge skills challenge. I think that what is needed is a significant expansion in mentally an expansion in Springboard. In that program, it should, if effectively this money was used, to tend to acquire, if you like, skills education on a tendered basis, I think it would be more effective. I give you the example earlier. I spoke about back in '99 when we had this tender to create IT places. And then that being blocked by the Department of Education subsequently. Effectively, when you go to tender, you get the kind of economies whereby 5 students were educated, at the same cost as 1. And they came out with graduates with QQI degrees as good as any other institution. Now, so effectively, if you want the National Training Fund used, then let's focus it on skills training and skills education and let it go out to tender.
We'll agree to disagree, Councillor Hegarty. I really want to see, I feel passionately about having that higher education and education is a public good. I have to put my cards on the table. And that's why I believe that we need to invest in the core funding in the way that it's done very successfully in other countries to have the type of model that we need to have. But that's fine. That's okay. I just want to ask if I have time. Have I time?
10 seconds left, and I have to fear because Deputy, this is your second slot, so I am being strict. So no. Yeah. Very quickly, and I get them. And you can ask the question. No, you can ask the question, and I get them to reply later on in the meeting. So
maybe in one of the other things, and it's only in terms of the international partnerships, and I agree very much in terms of the exchange of learning and all that can be done there. But I also want, just in terms of the possibilities for all-island partnerships as well, and the development there, and how much the lack of funding is an impediment to that, or what can we do across the island. And I'm particularly thinking even in terms of medicine and addressing the labour shortage in our hospitals and primary care on an all-island basis, where we can have those partnerships and exchange of learnings, like we have as well in the cancer research thing, so it fits into all that, the all-island strategy for that. So, thank you.